Well, hello, everyone. I'm Tyler Chrestman, and welcome to the Chrestman Conversation. Today on the podcast, for those of you who are watching, can tell that today on the podcast is a special episode. We are joined for the second time by my friend Jacob Turner, a candidate for Missouri's 8th Congressional District. Jacob, thank you for joining us on the podcast.
Thank you for having me, sir.
Oh, it is always my pleasure. So I think that you and I have discussed a couple times over this past year. It's been about a year since we did this. And over the past times, we've had a few conversations, and we had talked about what happened recently, possibly happening at some point in the future. And that is when we initially spoke, you were the Libertarian candidate for this seat in Congress. And we had talked about why not run as a Republican. We talked about it in our first interview. We've talked about it privately a few times. And we'd weighed out the pros and cons. We had multiple discussions on this, and we knew it was a possibility. And I think the biggest thing, the reason why we're here today, is to talk about your official switch from being the Libertarian candidate running for Congress to now you are running for the Republican Party for that seat. So I want to talk about, why did we make this switch? Why are you, as the former Libertarian candidate, now going to be running as a Republican?
Well, I ran into the same issues that Ron Paul ran into back in the 70s. You know, the media refused to cover our ideas, what we had to say, what we had to offer. We weren't invited to speaking events. So normally they have Lincoln Day events where they bring all the candidates out. We weren't invited to those as a Libertarian candidate. When I made the switch, I didn't change any of my policies, any of my stances. I just ran on the Republican ticket because I feel that I am a conservative candidate anyway, so I can make that switch. I'm a right spectrum libertarian, so therefore it's kind of interchangeable on a ticket. And I mean, because we see like Ron Paul, he served in Congress for many years, I think 20 years as a Republican.
Something like 8 elections or something like that. 8 elections from Texas that he was a Republican. Yeah.
Right. And libertarianism is my philosophy, and it's just a philosophy of non-authoritarianism. You know, I don't feel like we have the right to force our views out of fear or opinion onto others. We should allow others to live their life so how they see fit, so long as they don't hurt anyone or take their stuff or hurt their stuff. So, you know, it's a philosophy. And so therefore it doesn't quite lock me down to the point where I can't run and make myself more accessible to become a policymaker. You know, I started out as just an educator of the liberty movement, where I was traveling around talking about the importance of liberty and what it meant, that we should safeguard those, so we don't end up in a position like we see our neighbors to the north, Canada. They're in a world of hurt. They're in a bind. And there came a switch to where I realized that to get a fair shake in today's society from the establishment, so that the people can be introduced to you, you have to put yourself in a position to actually become a policymaker. And that position for us was to join the Republican Party.
So what is it that you think that, let's imagine for a second, let's imagine a voter who's in Missouri's Congressional 8th District, who really liked your libertarian stances, maybe is even a card-carrying member of the Libertarian Party. And this is a person who, they probably vote Republican more than they vote Democrat. So we're going to say a right-leaning libertarian. What is it you're going to bring that you believe to the Republican Party that the Republican Party is missing? And how are you going to make an appeal to the voter who maybe doesn't vote Republican, either the independents or the Democrats who are more libertarian minded where they exist? And what are you going to bring to the Republican Party, and how are you going to bring in these voters and make them say that you're the candidate that should represent them?
Well, the big thing I think that separates myself is, well, one of many, is the fact that I'm against corporate bailouts. So, and I'm also against the idea that we should only lift taxes on one class of people. So for instance, a lot of Republicans believe in trickle down economics, where if we take the taxes off the rich, well, then that trickles down to jobs. And a lot of times we see the middle class and the working class folks, they end up carrying the weight of the tax burden. And then, you know, for instance, we'll get into quantitative easing later. I'll bring that up and talk about why that we see when money goes to just one upper class that all it does is just separate the gap, because they know how to stay rich, they know how to keep their money, and there's nothing wrong with that. But I think that's what I bring is I'm against corporate bailouts. I do not take money from special interest groups or from corporate donors, so that I'm allowed to speak out against those hard subjects. For instance, my opponent, he takes money from Pfizer, so he's unable to speak out against things like COVID mandates and such. So I have kept myself as clean, clean in this race, so that I'm able to really take the fight to what the Republican people have been saying. They want to fight the corruption. They want someone to go and fight the swamp. That is what I can offer, because I haven't taken part or accepted help from any of them.
So that was something I was going to bring up a little bit later that I found rather interesting about you, is that you have taken $0 from any large donors, and you've actually even encouraged individual donors to forego their financial support and instead want more of a grassroots, get physical kind of support. Now, what made your campaign decide that this was the philosophy you were going to practice? What made it decide that this is a winning strategy for an election?
Well, I don't know so much that it was just the whole campaign coming together saying this is it, because a lot of people weren't happy with me that I wasn't willing to take money anymore, But I started looking around at my neighbors. I started looking around at the folks out here, and they're hurting. I look at the posts. I go out, I meet these folks at the events, the people who make up our district. They're all saying the same thing. I'm being killed at the gas pumps. I'm being overtaxed. I don't know how I'm going to make it. My yearly wages aren't matching inflation or getting anywhere close. So I'm making less money this year than I did before. The dollar's worth less. I need help.
Right.
So how can a politician look those people in the face and say, I need your money? They need their money. But what I do believe that they can offer, and it doesn't put them out from giving, is to take a step up and to help spread the message and be a part of the change. If we want to fix this issue that they're in and that I'm in with them, because I am a member of the working class here in 8th District, we have to take action. Just like my willingness to step up and put myself in this position to run for office, we have to do the things that are hard to make the change. And I feel like it's more beneficial if we get out and get involved than it is just to throw $100 towards a candidate.
Have you received any pushback or flack from anyone due to this switch? Did for example, the Libertarian Party have some words with you, or have any of your constituents or potential constituents come up and been expressed any disappointment, or have you found that it's been pretty well received?
I've had a few libertarians, ask me like, why? Like, because I'm a diehard libertarian. I have been preaching the message for a long time. And I just explained to them, this is, if you want freedom and liberty, this is how we get it. We have to fight. We have to get in office. We have to be policymakers, or there's going to be no change. And until we build up the education across this nation about what libertarianism is, it's going to be hard, and also to break the rules that keep people down. For instance, even as a Republican candidate, the Republican establishment in Missouri is still cheating me. They're still cheating me, and I can tell you exactly how.
Yeah.
So in the Republican primary, the Republican Party is not supposed to show favoritism towards the incumbent or the two people running in the primary. So I'm going to be in a primary against the incumbent. We're the only two in the race. They're not allowed to show favoritism. They're only allowed to promote both equally. At the events, they've given this guy, at the local events, when we go, they give him 30 minutes to talk. They give me 3 to 5. So at the fair, if you want to put a sign up, for instance, there used to be a third candidate in the race, but he ended up not being able to continue for certain reasons. Great guy. When I met him, I was so happy that there was a good, hardworking, just working class pipe fitter, hardworking fella who's running against Jason Smith in the Republican Party. And I thought, man, if it ends up just being he and I running against each other in the in the official election, I'll be completely happy because that's a win-win for the people.
Right.
And his name was Jeremy. He had a booth set up. He had signs that he wanted to put on the Republican tent at the fair. Well, they wouldn't allow him to put his signs up on the tent, but they kept Jason's up there. So that's breaking the rules.
Yeah.
So they're giving advertisement to the incumbent, and they're giving him time. It's just that little nudge, that little push, and those little things count.
They do count. They count a lot. We talked about this last time briefly when we discussed term limits in Congress. But one of the things that has always bothered me is that you have these races where you'll have somebody new to politics running against someone who's been in politics for a while. It doesn't matter whether it's one election cycle, 2 or 20. If they've been in politics a while and they have the weight of the machine behind them, the incumbent wins 80 to 90% of the time. And when you're saying that the incumbent wins 80% of the time, in my opinion, you're not looking at a fair election, because clearly then the system has been set up in such a way to disenfranchise people to run against the establishment by definition. Jason Smith, I don't know the man very well, but he's an elected politician, which makes him by definition part of the establishment at this point. And when you have the entire weight of a political machine behind you, it's very difficult for someone to overcome. So I see exactly what you're saying. Trust me.
And I'm sure they're in cahoots about it, you know?
Oh yeah.
I've met the guy. I'm not too fond of him. Hell, he's the reason a lot of the reason I'm running. You know, I called him when the lockdowns came. I've tried to talk it out with him as just a constituent. And I was met with arrogance. I was met with you should inform yourself. Well, I did inform myself, and now I'm running this race. So be careful who you tell to inform yourself, sir. That's what I would say.
Yeah.
You can't treat your people with arrogance. Eventually someone will come along and they just won't have it. And then you never know what people are capable of. I didn't even know what we were capable of. You know, this all started with me pacing around in the living room, mad that watching the news, watching my country get locked down, watching people be told you can't go bury your parents unless you can only have 5 people. Or if you get married, you can only have 5 people, or you can't go watch the ultrasound of your child unless you have a shot.
Right.
You know, this is ridiculous, this tyrannical wave that the government went on. And once they figure out they can strip liberties, or you can't go to church, you can't practice your religion. It's this kind of actions that fired me up in the first place. It made me want to make a change. And when you call your representatives, you're hoping that at least you can get someone who will give you a fair and honest conversation. And that wasn't found. Yeah. And for that reason, it birthed the Liberty Movement for Missouri, because we have been running hard. What started off with just 3 people, I told people this now, you know, we have 35 people on the campaign now. We have 35 people in the campaign. We've inspired a Young Americans for Liberty chapter to be founded on SEMO. Now they're starting one in Poplar Bluff. There's like 25 people now in the one at SEMO University.
That's excellent.
Those are all those young kids just listening to what it means, what liberty means, what freedom means, and they're getting fired up.
I found it very interesting when I re-listened to our first discussion that one of the things that did not come up at all in the entire 70 minutes that we didn't talk about COVID at all. We never spoke about it one time. And I couldn't believe that happened from 2 people like yourself and me, who that's a big one for both of us. And I've heard you bring it up now 2 times. We're talking about mandates. You're talking about vaccine requirements. We haven't mentioned explicitly the passports, but you did mention Canada and some of the other countries. So what is it that you saw that the U.S. was doing, or that different places around the world were doing, that you found worrisome? What is it that you saw that you thought, this is not okay with me, this is not going to stand? If I was in charge, you give me the scepter and I get to wave it around and make the rules, what is it you're going to do differently? Because in the future, we might have another pandemic and we need to learn lessons. What are the lessons we should learn?
The lesson is that we should never have a lockdown. 1. Yeah. 2, we don't pump out endless stimulus checks because what people don't understand is they're not going to raise our taxes to pay for these. We're going to get taxed on the back end with a hidden tax called inflation. Mm. And that's what we're feeling right now.
But
and
Jacob,
I don't think,
Jacob, Joe Biden said that it wasn't government spending that caused it. He said so. How could that be the case?
No. I don't know. These people, a lot of them don't understand either way. I tried to be nice at this last event. I got off from giving a speech. I was motivated. My adrenaline was going, and I tried to engage with my opponent and speak with him. And I wanted to tell him, like, look, we're in financial trouble. And I have ideas about the economy that I feel, and I'm willing to extend an offer an olive branch. And honestly, that was a mistake, because he doesn't want to fix these issues. These issues, the more issues he has, the worse it gets, the more he can use that to get elected and yell about how he wants to fire Nancy Pelosi and blah, 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 blah. It's like, well, the people of her district elected her. So,
right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, I don't like her much either, but like, what are you talking about?
It's not your district. You can't exactly fire someone from someone else's district. And I don't know if San Francisco is going to change anytime soon. So you just mentioned inflation. I'm sorry, I broke you up with my little Biden joke, but when you're looking at this inflation today and you're saying, okay, so to be fair to Joe Biden, we did a lot of spending the last year of Donald Trump's presidency. And some of it at the time may have seemed necessary, but it looks like in hindsight, these were bad ideas or not great ideas at all, because the first lockdown started under the last year of Donald Trump's presidency. The first stimulus checks came out under Donald Trump. And a lot of this is contributing to it now. It may have started under Trump, but it exploded under Biden. The spending is out of control. So what is the idea to bring that back down to earth? How do we bring government spending back from this spot where we're talking about, oh, it's just another $1 trillion that we're spending on whatever this project is? And how do we bring that under control? And how do we fight inflation at this point? Because it's 7% last month.
Yeah, I'm going to let people in on a little secret, and it's going to sound dark. It's going to sound not very optimistic, but it really is optimistic in the long run. Yeah. And that is that this current system that we have, since the day they installed the fiat system, we have been doomed to fail. Eventually, it's going to fail. It's just the can gets kicked down the road, but as we're seeing, it's just building, and eventually it will come to an end. And they're going to look for a new way to reestablish a financial system, because we will not be able to get it under control. For instance, every time they borrow money, they have to take out a loan to make sure that they can print that money. And that loan has an interest. So how do you pay interest on money that you've never had before? You don't have, you don't have enough money to cover that, because you get a certain amount of money. That interest is extra, right? You didn't print for that interest. You printed for the amount you borrowed. So how do you pay that interest? You print more money. They have to keep going, and they have to keep borrowing. They have to keep spending, because that's the way the system is built. It's broken. No one's willing to cut. The right isn't willing to cut on the military. The left isn't willing to cut on social issues. And we're in a downward spiral. All they want to do is keep stuffing pork in these bills to take a little bit of pork back to their district so they can say that they did something. But they are single-handedly driving this country off a financial cliff. That's the bad news. Okay, that's the bad news.
What's the
and one man's not going to fix that. Hell, 10 men ain't going to fix this. It's the economy's broken, and it's going to go. The good news is that we do still have gold on reserve, and we do know a system that works without having too many highs, too many lows. And what being backed by gold does, having the dollar backed by gold, is it limits the amount of money that government can spend. So it bridles them. And that's why they wanted to come off the gold standard in the first place, was because they wanted to be able to spend as much as possible. And they didn't want to be held back. So I think that once it finally does run off a cliff, we're going to have to reestablish a different way. What I'm hoping they don't do is I'm hoping that the US doesn't create a blockchain and like kind of mimic Bitcoin. And then that just brings more control and authority over our money, because then they can manage it through through.
I became I became very concerned about this. I know that some of my friends are a little annoyed with me, or I look like the conspiracy theory guy at this point when it comes to talking about governments implementing their own form of electronic currency. But it has become, I used to think it might be a good idea. I don't use cash. I'm one of those people. I carry a card around. I use my credit card for everything most of the time. And it just seems more convenient. It's nice to have a card and I just swipe it and it goes and you go about your life. But I have watched the Canada. Canada is a great example. When they say, oh, anyone who participated in this convoy, and then anyone who donated money to the GoFundMe for the convoy before they shut that down, well, we're just going to go ahead and freeze your bank accounts. We're going to use this emergency rule to classify you as domestic terrorists, and we're going to freeze your bank accounts until we figure out what's going on. And then we've done the same thing to Russia. Now, you might think whatever you want to think about Russia, which, I'm not a big fan of Russia. And obviously what they're doing in Ukraine is not great. But the idea that, well, we woke up one day and we just turned off Russia's bank accounts. We just said, oh, well, if you're a Russian citizen and you're on this list of people, you can't bank anymore. And we just took their money. We just shut it off. So that has become very concerning to me. And I get a feeling like that's what you're talking about when you're talking about the electronic currency a government might implement.
That's right. Because as long as it's not decentralized, like a crypto, well, then it can be controlled. If it's centralized, and then they will utilize that to reign over you and use their authority. And it's like, for instance, when they talk about these electric cars, I've seen a politician call out and say, well, I want Elon Musk to shut down all the electric cars in Russia. Did you see that?
I did not see that.
Yeah, an article came out. He was requesting that he turn the cars off. I didn't know that was a part of buying the car, that he had the ability to shut it off.
Yeah, I didn't know.
It's a very, very odd thing to say. And I think they probably let that one slip.
Yeah.
So you're telling me he has the ability to just shut cars off? So they can shut your money off. They can shut your cars off. That isn't conspiracy theory. That's an actual politician coming out and saying it in the news.
Yeah. So. And it's worrisome to cede control of your life or cede autonomy of your life for convenience, because I wouldn't mind driving a Tesla. Teslas are pretty nice cars. They're
right.
Pretty nice. But the idea that then, because the Tesla is so automated, that it also can be controlled by somebody else, or that my money, it's very nice to have a credit card and be able to just swipe. It would be very nice to have the government come out with a digital currency and I just pull up my government approved app and spend my money. That seems convenient. But what it does is it just cedes a little bit of autonomy every time that you're doing this. And in ceding that, you're giving somebody else control over your life, whether or not you realize it. And that's dangerous. That is dangerous.
I work on the ambulance, as you know. I don't know if the people watching this know, but I am a paramedic. And I ended up catching COVID. Got really sick, tested at a hospital testing center. And do you know that they reached out and contacted my child's daycare? My child was at daycare. Now, I hadn't been home because I was on a 48. So I hadn't been home, hadn't been around the kid. And before that, they were out of town. So luckily, I wasn't around my child. But they contacted and told them that I had contacted COVID, the state. So think about that. They're able to tell your medical history, and so that way they kicked my kid out of daycare for 10 days, even though I hadn't been around her. So that's the kind of like little controls that they implement. So imagine if they're willing to do that, are they willing to shut your car off when you get sick so you won't leave the house? Are they willing to shut your money off so you're forced to stay home?
I was telling somebody about this the other day, how in Australia, which we think of as a westernized country, in Australia, they are stopping people in the streets and asking them where they're going. Where are you going? And if you don't have a reason to be out of your house, you get a ticket. Oh, you're only allowed out of your home for necessary travel at this point. So you're going to work, you're going to the grocery store. But if you're out of your house and they say, well, where do you live? You live here. The grocery store is here. This isn't the block you should be on. They're giving people tickets for these kind of things. They arrested a guy for being out on the beach doing some paddleboarding. outside by himself on the beach. Well, you're not supposed to be out of your house. And they arrested this dude. And I say, this kind of stuff people don't think about in the US because we have had the luxury of having a lot of freedom here. We have the Bill of Rights, and we look at it and we say, well, look at this, the Bill of Rights, these 10 things that we are promised. And I say that's only as good as the people who are in office to uphold it, because that's just it. When it all is said and done, it's a piece of paper.
We
And
we had we
politicians will
had
trample
yeah
it. Yeah, if
we
they
had we had a Bill of Rights.
Hmm.
We had a Bill of Rights before the Patriot Act was installed.
Mm,
We
yeah,
had a bill of rights before COVID tyranny. Do you think the government still adheres to those? I don't.
it is the Patriot Act. If you're going to talk about a violation, and this was Republicans who championed it. If you want to talk about a violation of the Bill of Rights, the Fourth Amendment protects against unlawful search and seizure. The unlawful wiretapping that was done by the NSA as a result of the Patriot Act seems like the biggest constitutional violation of all time. And to my knowledge, no one has ever been held accountable for this. No one has ever gone to prison for violating the law. And it is troublesome how, but it's a great example. It was done after one of the biggest crises in American history. You're talking about a time when everyone was fearful that there could be another attack. We could have another 9/11. And you say, well, give the government power to protect us, because that's what happens when people are afraid. They're afraid of COVID. And what happens? Well, the government's just trying to protect you. So just let them do what they say is best, and they'll take care of you. No, thank you. I'll take care of me. And I expect the government to try and help, but I don't want them to coddle me, and nor do I want them to trample on my rights. How do we get past that mindset? If it's really the people who cede their power to the government, how do you wake them up?
I think it's through education of utilizing platforms like this. I think it's voices like you who get up and weekly come out and talk to the people about their freedoms and how they're being trampled on. I think it's about people running for office, and if they get elected, think about the platform that I'll have to speak about liberty and freedom if elected to Congress. That's a giant platform where I'll be given, the ability to speak on news outlets, major national news outlets. So I think that people like us have to start running for office. We have to become more active in like activism. I think that's the way. We just have to. And I think as the weight and the grip starts getting tighter on the people, I think more people are going to start to wake up and respond, because they have gotten lax. We have gotten lax. We've allowed things to occur that never would have been able to occur a few hundred years ago.
I look at when Canadians by the thousands are out in the streets, you say, okay, something is happening, because Canadians don't do that. They don't have that style of American protest like we've had here, whether for good or bad. When you look at the quote unquote summer of love, when you had all the riots that occurred and all the protests and everything, America has a history of that. Well, that doesn't happen in Canada. So when you have thousands of Canadians who block down the capital of Canada in their trucker convoy, you say, okay, well, this is actually a good sign that people are going to eventually hit a point. If Canadians hit that point, then you know that Americans will at some point. The problem is that Canada just went a little farther than the US. And I'm curious to know where that point is in the US. And I hope we never find it, but I think eventually we might. Who knows? It's hard to say.
Yeah, that's why, like, I define what I'm trying to achieve is my goal is to promote peace and prosperity by straight adherence of individual liberty. I live by that code right there. Yeah. If I could put it in, a few lines, that would be it. And I think that we need leadership who's willing to focus on individuals' liberty.
It would be nice if you talk about in the United States, especially those on the left, they're always concerned about the minority groups, right? So you're concerned with these groups that aren't equally represented in the country. And I always say that we should be concerned with the groups of minorities in the country. And the number one group we should be concerned of is also the smallest group, because the smallest minority in the country is the individual. And every one of us should be treated as though we are the smallest of the small minority, because it's absolutely true that the individual person is what's important. I don't care about anyone's group identity. It doesn't matter to me where you belong. I'm not, for example, I'm not part of some white group. I don't consider the fact that someone else is white to put them in a camp with me of any kind. It doesn't matter. I don't care what you look like. I don't care what I don't care what you believe when you wake up in the morning. What I care is about the ideas that come out of your head and what you want to do to me. Do you want to harm me? Then I don't like you. Do you want me to just live and leave me alone? Then we can be buds. It's that is a very simple philosophy that I feel like you embody, and that I wish more that you're advocating for more politicians to embody, which would be great.
Yeah, that was almost a classic Ayn Rand line.
Basically, yeah.
And I love it. I love it.
I just want to real quick. We talked about this a moment ago, and I want to, or you brought it up a moment ago, and I wanted to ask you about it because it is the number one thing in the world right now, and an area that there is a lot of nuance and a lot of different opinions that can equally be respected. But we've brought up Russia in the periphery a couple times in this interview. Right now, what are your thoughts on what's happening in Ukraine? What should the U.S. be doing? What is it for those people who maybe don't know what's going on? What is it that you believe is happening? What should happen? What should we do? What would you advocate? Any of that?
The first thing I'd say is I see a lot of people saying I stand with Ukraine. I stand with, this country, that country. I don't stand with the government. I stand with the people who are being affected by their government's poor choices. And that goes for the Russian people as well. Mm-hmm. When we talk about destroying an economy, we have to think about that 3-year-old. When I look at my kids, there's many children in Russia with the same age who we destroy their economy. We're going to be starving those kids. And I understand that their government is bad, but when we attack it and we try to solve these, we need to neutralize the aggressors and stay away from trying to destroy the people, because that's just I think that's a barbaric and archaic way to look at warfare. I think we need to start targeting and focusing on the actual aggressors who's causing the issues, because even over here, for instance, our government makes decisions all the time that aren't representative of our people. They're always imposing their way as a government onto other countries and causing conflict and stirring up trouble. But you and I have no qualms with them. You and I have no qualms with the good folks of those foreign countries. That's just, that's their government causing trouble. And then, we're just attached to it, sadly. But I really hate to see good people on both sides, the Ukrainian people and the Russian people, who don't want anything to do with any of this. And it's not as easy as, we'll stand up and fight your government if you don't agree. Well, right. We didn't agree with COVID. Nobody stood up and fought here in the United States. We just wrote it out. So, and that was the most tyrannical our government had ever been. So it's not that easy. It's a much more complicated system when you look at people, not just a government. It's easy to paint a group of people as bad and evil, and they're the ones we go after. Let's destroy them, destroy their economy. But what are we really saying? It's dark, isn't it?
It's one of the things that I have really not liked. And you can say, here, I could say this unequivocally. Vladimir Putin is a KGB thug. He's a bad man, and I don't care what happens to him. He's a bad dude. He's a bad actor on the world stage. I don't care if bad things happen to him. He is not a good person. So there we go. Say that right out front. However, what I have not liked about the response is exactly what you're talking about, where we are seemingly punishing Russian citizens who might not support Vladimir Putin for no reason. I saw, for example, and here's just some silly examples. Like we're pulling Tarkovsky from symphonies. This man died 100 years ago. Why are we not playing Russian composers at the symphony because Vladimir Putin invaded Ukraine? Why is it that there's a film festival that pulled all the films entered by people of Russian descent from being shown? Do you think that punishing Russian people, now I get it, maybe if the director of a film comes out and says, yeah, I support Vladimir Putin and those Ukrainians can go to hell, okay, we don't have to let that guy in our film festival. But saying you're Russian, therefore we don't like you, that's trouble. Because what do you think happens if you ostracize an entire country? Do you believe that it's going to foment a coup? It's a possibility. Or do you think that it makes a stronger Russian national identity? Oh, the world really doesn't like us, but you know who does? Vladimir Putin. And let's support him. It could go either way, but I don't think that it's necessary to go after Russians in general for Vladimir Putin's sins.
Yes. Thank you. Thank you.
I feel like I'm preaching to the choir there, but yes.
No, it feels good to hear somebody else say it, and it causes blowback. Hate causes blowback. We got to stop it. We got to stop demonizing groups of people just because they have a tyrannical government forcing decisions over them. You know, you say, well, I would stand up and go and I would go handle business. You know, I would go 1775 over there. Well, here's the thing is when you got government actors who will come and kill your family, it's a little bit harder to make those kinds of decisions over there.
Right.
They literally will wipe out a family and not think twice. A journalist like yourself speaks out, it's game over.
When the founding fathers signed the Declaration of Independence, they realized that what they were doing was signing a document that was essentially their death warrant if they lost. And you say, you sign this piece of paper, you are going to war with King George. And if you lose, he will kill you. But what King George wouldn't do is burn the entire colonies to the ground to kill those men. He wouldn't murder your wife and children. For the most part, like they didn't used to conduct warfare that way. It was thought to be a gentleman's game. Vladimir Putin will assassinate a target in Britain and not care. He'll poison someone with the worst chemical warfare weapons you can possibly find. And owing to his KGB roots, he will black bag an entire family if they are too troublesome. So I understand why Russian people are more hesitant to rise up than we would say, oh, well, I would grab my AR-15 and I'd go to war. No, you wouldn't. No, it's very few people would. It's very difficult to imagine.
You know, we should have probably let him in NATO when he asked in the 90s.
It's an interesting thought. I don't know whether or not I would have, but because the entire reason that NATO exists is basically to combat Russia. And you say, well, if you let Russia in, then what is actually the point of NATO? And right now we're saying, well, I don't know. And I don't know what is the benefit or the drawback. NATO has all sorts of issues in general. But it is interesting to think maybe we should have not treated him as so much of an ideological enemy. But at the same time, I think that if you treat him as a friend, he's the kind of friend who will take advantage of that any chance he gets, because he's not a good actor. So
that's right. But I do think that bringing people in and when he was willing to come to the table, I think that you can still keep him at a table's distance, but maybe he would have been more willing to work with us. And I understand why I understand why Bill Clinton chose not to allow him to come in.
Right.
It does make things easier when you do have an enemy, because you have something to focus on to raise money for things like NATO. If everybody's getting along, it's hard to justify such a large budget.
It's interesting to think back to when Mitt Romney ran for president and he said, oh, Russia is one of our greatest threats. And Obama said, oh, the 1980s called and they want their foreign policy back. And it looks like Mitt Romney was probably right. China is probably our greatest ideological threat in the world, but Russia is not our buddy. And they have their own game that doesn't involve us that they want to play. And so it is interesting. We both agree we shouldn't punish Russian citizens. What should we do? Is there anything the U.S. can do to help Ukraine at this point? Is there anything that we should be doing differently in the future? But what is it that we do if we're not going to? We both agree we shouldn't hurt just Russian people.
I think we need to hold to our agreements. If we say we're not going to encroach a country's borders or come up on a country's borders, we should stay off their borders. I think that that's a good start. You know, we can't keep making promises and then going back on it. If you're talking about what we can control, we can't control his aggression. We can't control his poor temperament, and he may have to be dealt with. But let's deal with him specifically and leave the people out of it, because cut the head off the snake. You know, if we got to get our hands dirty, well, then we need to target the bad actors and get it over with.
So there is something to be said about this that I know that Tulsi Gabbard, for example, has talked about how we basically told Russia that NATO would not expand eastward past a certain point, and we've slowly expanded eastward past that point. So when you look at Vladimir Putin, you have to say, okay, from his perspective, he's not in NATO. He knows that NATO is specifically formed in opposition to him. So you're saying you're not allowed to go past a certain point, leave these countries alone. We may have encroached on that. There's some disagreement about whether or not that was an explicit agreement or just implied, but we are encroaching on the border of Russia. The thing is that now, whatever you say about our encroachment, he's invaded a country.
Right.
And so you say, okay, in the future, maybe we should be more mindful about our agreements. Maybe we should be more mindful about the Russian point of view, which is that if the US considers us an enemy, which we do, then you understand his point of view. But this is now the third time in 15 years that he's invaded a sovereign nation. So right now, currently, respecting his borders is not just an answer. So do you think that, for example, we should be imposing sanctions? Do you think we should be supplying arms to Ukraine? What is there anything that you could point to or have thoughts on? And it's okay to not know, but is there anything that you could say we should be doing this as opposed to just in the future respecting Russia's point of view?
Yeah, I think the obviously feeding them money, which goes back to destroying their economy, you know, it's kind of a double-edged sword, right? You're going to punish the people. The people start having a hard way of life. They blame the American people. They get rallied up. They turn and focus on us. I think that it comes down to, if we're going to handle it, like I said, we need to target the specific actors. And as far as dumping too much more money into foreign countries as aid, we have to be careful about that, because we don't have that money on hand. Therefore, we have to print that money, and it's just building inflation in our country. So yeah, I look at it like when you're going down in a plane, the oxygen mask falls out. They always say, put it on you first. So something, you know, with all this foreign aid that we're dumping in, it's kind of dangerous, because we're not putting the mask on us first. You know, we're not taking care of us at home first. And foreign aid is taking money from the poor people of a rich country and giving it to the rich people of a poor country. That's mainly what foreign aid is. So we get robbed, it comes off our backs, and then it goes to the higher tier of a country, and then they're supposed to funnel that money down.
Yeah.
A lot of times that money goes towards a lot of other things that it should, which it's out of our control.
So it almost be a faux pas at this point to bring up, because right now we are Ukraine's big ally, but it was well known before this crisis that the Ukrainian government is incredibly corrupt. The money that we give them does not go where it should go, and it's going to make the Ukrainian oligarchs rich. And right now, it's probably not the best time to bring it up, but we talked about this, and even Joe Biden has talked about the fact that the Ukrainian government is not very reliable, and you obviously don't want Russia to invade a country. And right now, I would say I stand with Ukraine against Russian aggression. Now, does that mean that I think the Ukrainian government is good? No, they have demonstrated a corrupt ability to take advantage of their own citizens. So I don't think they're doing a great job. But I see exactly what you're saying, that the more foreign aid that we give countries like this, we're making we are seeding the corruption in their own government, because it doesn't just go where we think it goes. We're saying, oh, here's $1. We're going to give it to this child to feed them. And then they say, well, here's 20 cents to that child to feed them, and 80 cents is going to my new mega yacht. And so
Right.
I agree with you. I agree with you.
Well,
It's a complicated process.
it kind of goes back in the 80s. We trained this foreign fighter in Afghanistan. We trained him how to take down an empire like Russia when they were being attacked, and we taught them tactics. We gave them weapons. We funded them on how to lure a country in and destroy them in a foreign land.
Yeah.
And that gentleman, ended up flying or having planes fly into our buildings, and then we got drug into a war over his behavior. And he's far gone and dead, but he turned around and used that those weapons and that money we had funneled him and that training, and he ended up luring us into a 20-year war.
Yeah, back when the Mujahideen was our ally in the Middle East, and we said, oh well, obviously the enemy of my enemy is my friend, right? And it said, no, they're still your enemy too. They hate everyone. They definitely don't like you.
Yeah, he literally used the game plan that we helped him construct to defeat Russia.
Yeah,
they turned around and used it on us, and look at our economy. Did we win? Look at us leaving all that gear over there, all that money, all that equipment for them. They're better armed now than they ever was. Did we win that? I don't think so. And I think we have to be cautious.
Yeah. The Taliban have more Black Hawk helicopters than almost any country in the world. We could talk about Afghanistan for an hour, because actually we talked about it the last time you and I spoke. And I'd like to say that I believe I may truly be clairvoyant, because I said that if we pull out of Afghanistan, it was the big thing that I said to you, if we pull out of Afghanistan, it's going to be a gigantic mistake for a number of reasons. And here's all the ones that I laid out. And then I look now and I say, oh my gosh, it's like you can see the future. It was a terrible debacle. And I get it. People don't like the endless wars. We could talk about that probably for another hour. But I actually wanted to ask you something about Ukraine before we get off into the weeds of foreign policy. Right now, I would say if you were to poll voters, and I don't know this for a fact, but I do believe it's true. If you were to poll voters, the number one thing that they'd be talking about is the gas prices at the pump. You mentioned it briefly earlier. Obviously, it's what everyone in the media has been talking about. You've seen countless stories on it. What, in your view, is the problem? Why are gas prices so high? What can government do to fix it?
Well, he interfered with a country. A lot of it comes from Biden is right when he says that there are supply chain issues, but there's supply chain issues off of his policies. A lot of it in the beginning was manufactured so that we would start going in a more green route. They shut down the pipeline. They shut down oil productions in a lot of areas in our country. And we went from being energy independent to relying on the country that now we're in a tiff with, not for a large amount, but for enough that it's actually causing, the gas prices to rise. But gas prices were on the rise before. And that was due to the fact that the Biden administration was trying to manipulate it so that we would the system so that we would start to go towards a more green way of living. I mean, they've put all their stock into electric cars, into green renewable energy. That's what everybody's bought their stock in the Democrat Party, and they're trying to push us in that direction. And one way to get us there is to make us hurt at the pump. And then you have Booty Peg or Boochie Peg, whatever his name is, get on here and say, well, maybe you should buy an electric car. You think you think it's coincidence that he says that? You think it's coincidence that they are always pushing electric cars? It's not. It's by design. We went through the same issue with Obama in 2008. I'm old enough to remember. I remember the pain at the pump when Obama was in office. I remember that.
I found it amazing. I've seen it from a couple of different people, that idea that it's almost like a let them eat cake moment. Oh, well, if the peasantry is hungry, let them eat cake. Oh, you're hurting at the pump, just buy an electric car. Well, the average price for an electric vehicle is $51,000. That's $30,000 higher than the price of a regular car. So if you can't afford the extra few bucks in gas, why don't you buy a car that's $30,000 more expensive? These people live in an alternate reality if they think that that's the solution.
Well, you see what they've done to the car manufacturers. They made them shut down productions in America on several cars. If you go on the Ford car website and you look at what cars they're producing, you have a Mustang for cars, not for like crossovers and trucks. They have a Mustang and then all electric cars.
Yeah.
They took the Ford Focus away. They took the Fiesta away. All these good gas mileage vehicles aren't being produced in America anymore. Why is that?
Yeah.
They have an agenda.
Yes. And I've seen a lot of disingenuous arguments about this from the Biden administration that someone like myself find very frustrating, but to the average voter who might not be as well informed, when he says, oh, well, this is Vladimir Putin's fault that the gas prices are spiking. Well, for the first time ever, when Donald Trump was president, we were basically energy independent. We were still importing energy. We were still importing oil, I should say, but we were actually a net exporter of oil for the first time ever. So when you come into office in day one, you cut back on the amount of drilling that we're going to do in the natural reservoirs. You make it much harder for oil and gas companies to get leases. It takes about 3 days in Texas to get a lease for an oil field, and it takes the federal government 150 days to give you that same lease. So you can't, when he says, oh, well, we have all these leases that are not being used. Well, that's because it should take you 3 days and it takes you 150 days to approve someone to go drill. And you say you cancel the Keystone pipeline, you greenlit this entire Ukraine debacle was done. It was set in motion day one of Joe Biden's presidency when he greenlit Nord Stream 2, the pipeline from Russia into Germany, to go back into production. And so you say he has all these policies and then wants to blame everybody else for the rise at the pumps, as though it's not direct result of curbing back our ability to manufacture oil. And instead, what we're going to do is we're going to go to our enemies and import more oil. Right now, 5% of the production in the U.S. or 5% of the oil in the U.S. comes from Russian sources. There's no reason that should be the case. We can, if the Keystone XL pipeline had gone through, it would provide more barrels of oil than we get from Russia. We would have no Russian gas whatsoever. So I don't know. What do you think moving forward we're going to do to improve this? Or what would you do if you were in charge? What do you do to improve our gas production or get us off the foreign oil? What do you think is the way forward?
Well, I think it's going to come naturally. I think what's going to happen is the country is going to get fed up of them trying to force the transition to green energy so fast. Mm-hmm. You know, I talk about it a lot. It's like Netflix when it first came out. If you remember, Netflix used to send DVDs. So I'm talking to someone around my age, so I know that they know these things. So yeah. Netflix they come in the mail and you could put them in, you could watch them, and it was more like a renting service because they had streaming, but the streaming wasn't quite up to par yet. And that is green energy in our time right now. It's going to be great once we can, get there and get the technologies up to par. We can maybe do a lot more nuclear energy, which I prefer.
Yeah.
And why aren't we focused on that? That's the most clean energy that you can have, but they're not focused on that. But I guess they have no stock in that. Yeah. So,
right.
But to have that transition, we can't just abruptly stop and just force everybody onto the streaming service that glitches every 3 seconds. We have to work our way there over many years. We can't do things to affect and let the free market make those adjustments. The market will do it naturally. If a product is better and cheaper, the free market will switch to that product. Yep. If the product is more quality and more efficient, the people will naturally go to that product. We're not still ordering DVDs from Netflix. Now we're using streaming service. Why? Because the quality and the product. That's why I believe in the free market, and I believe we should allow the free market to go to carry out on its own, because it enacts the changes that we're looking for. It has the potential to unlock all those changes. It's not the government's doing. It shouldn't. The government needs to get out of it. Anything we put our nose in as the government, we mess up.
Yeah, I would agree that the only reason right now that things like wind and solar are functional at all is because the government pays tremendous amount of subsidies for them. The technology itself just isn't there. And I wish it was. I'm not saying, oh, I'm against it. I know for a fact that it's not there in the same way that coal and natural gas is. And you brought up nuclear power. I've always found that one of the best ways to test whether or not somebody's serious about green energy is to ask them about nuclear power. If you ask somebody who says they're for green energy, but they're against nuclear power, then this person's not informed. That's what that means to me. It means that you don't know the fact that you're thinking of Chernobyl and 5 Mile Island and not looking at the facts that we actually can make nuclear energy very safe, very effective, and it is very environmentally friendly when you compare it with anything else. So I'm glad to hear you say that you're for some more nuclear energy, which would be the way forward, in my opinion.
Yeah, I would definitely push for that in Congress. Mm-hmm. Push to go more for that. I think that's the future. I think that's the way, and it would alleviate so much issues on our economy, so much issues, so much burden on a pocketbook of everyday Americans. Sadly, they didn't implement any of that in this infrastructure bill.
No,
I didn't see any of it in there. I looked through it. Did you see they slipped gun control inside the Ukraine package for the relief?
I did not. What did they put in there? I have not seen this.
They've put in a whole series of making it. I forget the actual wording, but 39 Republicans voted in favor of this gun control little snippet in there. So that's how they get us. They trick us in putting this big, beautiful package together, and people can say, "I helped Ukraine."
Terrible. And
inside it, they have that where they talk about registering firearms and so.
Well, these when you have I don't know how long this one is, but when you have a 1,500-page bill that comes out and then you have 3 hours to vote on it, you say, well, that's just ridiculous, because what all that is a lot of pork a lot of the times, and a lot of little things that people want to get done that they know wouldn't never pass in a straight up vote, that they have to hide in other things. Those things drive me nuts.
Dishonest.
Oh, it is dishonest. It's incredibly dishonest. I want to ask you one last question here that I think I know the answer to, or at least part of the answer to, but I think it would be kind of a fun one that was actually suggested to me by somebody else, this question. And it's just one that I think you've brought up a couple times, a couple different people, but who is it that you would say that when you look at politics or you look at philosophy or religion, could be anything, who are the people that you admire, that you look up to, that you say, if I could emulate this person, I would want to be like them? Who are these people, your heroes?
I think Ludwig von Mises, Murray Rothbard. I think obviously Ron Paul. I've spoke very highly of Ron Paul about how he's been almost like a role model as I've grown in politics and looking at the way he conducted himself. He's one of in the Fed. That's right. A beautiful book. And I've been through it several times, and I agree with it. I agree with everything he says. So, but I think that Murray Rothbard, Mises, I think those are the guys that if I could just have a slither of what they brought to this world, if I could give that to the world, if I could give that amount of goodness and purity and honesty, they have put the information out in books, and they're long past now. Not Ron Paul, he's still with us, thank God, but Mises and Rothbard, they've passed, and their economics, the Austrian economic system, is, I believe, what will save this country in the long term. I think once we come off that financial cliff, if we can turn to Austrian economics, we will be a much more prosperous and free nation. So those would be who I'd choose.
Those are some good. A man after my own heart. When you ask him about his heroes, he lists off a bunch of economists. I could just as easily say Milton Friedman, Thomas Sowell. You got Frederick Hayek. You have all these guys. All of them are great. So I think we are coming up here on about an hour, somewhere around there. And we were going to do about an hour today. I want to give you, before we end, give me your, 60 seconds. 60 seconds, 2 minutes, straight at the camera, whatever's on your mind, whatever you want to say. Tell people where to find you, what to do, what you would ask of them, and why you're the man. And I'm just going to let you take it away. Close us out.
All right. Well, I appreciate it. Once again, my name is Jacob Turner, and I'm running for the U.S. House of Representatives for 8th District here in Missouri. You know, I'm a conservative. I'm a liberty-minded candidate. I'm a constitutionalist. I'm someone who wants to put individual liberties at the forefront of the message and the goal. So I believe that liberty is the idea, and true freedom should always be the goal of our leaders in this nation. And that's what I want to bring to Congress. For far too long, the people have been put on the back burners, and politicians have only been self-serving and gone up to fill their pockets in the Hill. So I want to do something a little different. I would love your support. You can find me at Jacob Turner for 8th District Congress on Facebook, jacobturner.nationbuilder on my website, and Jacob Turner for Liberty on Instagram. I'm not asking for any money for this campaign. All I'm asking for is that you take action. You take human action. We get out, we get involved, we try to make the world a better place. And if you agree with my message, I would really appreciate the help in sharing this message. And let's just inform the public that there's a candidate out here who isn't taking the money from Pfizer, isn't taking the money from Raytheon, isn't taking the money from these giant corporations that have bad intentions, who want to force us into wars or force us into COVID shots. You know, I'm trying to do this on, the most honest and professional way. And I need your help as citizens of this district. So thank you all. And thanks for listening.
Excellent way to end it out. Jacob, thank you for coming on the podcast today.
Thank you, sir.